Welcome to the Humans Against Poor Scholarship Summer Grant Interviews. Each one of our interviewees is competing for a $2,000 grant to help fund their summer research. Do you want to have a say in who gets funded? Become a HAPS donor today by visiting www.hapsfund.com/donate.
Hi Megan, you're muted at the minute. I don't know if you've caught it.
No, thank you. Oh my God. Katherine, thank you for that. And long-time viewers of the show will know that this is my own personal special effect. I do this, I think, 1 out of every 4 live streams. I start muted and talk madly and wave my arms around and everyone's like, what on earth is going on? Thank you for that. Hi, everyone. Again, welcome. This is Digital Hammurabi and we're doing our HAPS Summer Scholarship interviews. And today we have the lovely Katherine joining us. Katherine, could you introduce yourself and tell everyone where you are studying?
Yeah, so I'm Katherine. I'm a final year. I keep saying final year, the hope that it will come true. Ph.D. student at the University of Leeds in the UK. So it's based in the north of England, and I'm specialising in Hebrew Bible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What are your personal research interests?
So I broadly look at the intersection between a field called Utopian studies, which is the formal study of the concept of utopia and its kind of related disciplines of dystopia, Uchronia, etc. And it's what it can bring to the study of the Hebrew Bible.
Excellent. So okay, let's back up. For those who are unaware, what exactly is utopia?
Yeah, so you have to indulge a little nerdy moment. It's actually a pun. If anyone, Thomas More, Catholic saint, back in the 1500s, came up with the word utopia as a pun on good place and no place, so changing the Greek prefixes. So it's a term that encapsulates that, and it's used to describe his kind of island of real nasty colonial conquests and horrendous things, but it's a concept that describes a no place, but also often synonymously a good place, so somewhere that's an alternative world where we might play out what could the world be like, questions of, well, if we changed our political system, what could this world look like? If we changed our gender norms, what would this look like? You might be more familiar with dystopian literature if you're a big fan of films, so the Hunger Games. What would happen if there was this kind of authoritarian government? If you're a big sci-fi lover, Philip K. Dick's Man in the High Castle, what would happen if the Axis powers did win the war? Those are the sort of questions that are really asked in Utopia and kind of that field. So bringing that conversation to the Hebrew Bible.
Fantastic, thank you. And when you're looking at utopian studies, how exactly does that play into Hebrew Bible and our understanding of it?
So for me, it started out as kind of a bit of chasing down a footnote. Leviticus 25, with the Jubilee year, is always described as utopian. And as an undergraduate, I took a module in ancient Near Eastern law, and that was something that always came up. And I was really fascinated. What do we mean by utopian? What does it mean to say that the Jubilee year is utopian? How does that help us understand it better? As these scholars see it functioning within the text, but also is actually true? We keep saying this, but we're not actually exploring what that means. And so for my undergraduate thesis, I did an exploration to that. I would argue that you can read it as utopian, but you need to fully flesh out what you mean by that. And then put it away for a bit, came back for my PhD. And there's this real interest in, it's a very small group of scholarship since the late 1990s, when kind of questions about postmodernism and literary theory were being brought into the Hebrew Bible. So open up new questions. How do we read these texts? And a lot of scholars kind of stuck on the books of Chronicles, how they retell the king's narrative, the Samuel king's narrative, and how they do so to promote particular ideology. So that was really where kind of utopian studies in the Hebrew Bible has come along. But the way I take it, I look at the Book of Exodus and the laws in the Book of Exodus, and I'm predominantly asking what would happen if we read this as a utopian narrative. What new questions can this bring to our understanding of the text if we take a new kind of fresh literary critical approach? And that's really where my main motivation lies.
That's very interesting. Thank you. So I'm going to kind of repeat that back to you to make sure I fully understand. I suspect I don't. So feel free to correct me. What you're doing with the Exodus laws is looking at like treating them as ideals, maybe, rather than like a lived reality of the people who wrote them.
Yeah, so I am not kind of treating the text ahistorically or treating them as a piece of literature. My reading is synchronic, so I'm reading the piece as a narrative whole. Not necessarily, probably quite controversially, connecting it to the history. I think there is a scope for that. I think that scholars have and can do that. That wasn't the question that I wanted to ask of this text. And the reasons I didn't want to ask that question is that when we read these texts, so Exodus 20-23, the 10 Commandments, and then what we know as the Covenant Code, those two texts in scholarship have often been read through kind of ancient Near Eastern comparative literature, source criticism, form criticism, these additional insertions into what was a priestly source. All these questions keep coming up. And these questions seem to dominate this literature on this text. And part of when I was figuring out, okay, what do I actually want to get out from this PhD? What is it that I'm asking? I think there is a real motivation there to step up, leave those questions at the door, and say, okay, well, that conversation's already been had. What more can we find out about this text by applying a fresh approach, applying a fresh lens? I don't kind of believe in authoritative readings. I think we can look at text different ways. Where any reading we do as biblical scholars is anachronistic. We are never going to be able to access the time of the Hebrew Bible. It's so different from the way we live. So what are the other ways that we can understand this text? And in particular, Exodus is really interesting for me because I'm not from a faith background, but there is a lot of use of the Book of Exodus within kind of liberation theology, so Black theologies, feminist theologies, and they see it as this kind of coming out of Egypt, being brought out of wherever Egypt might be, whether that is literal enslavement or whether that's the kind of oppressive patriarchy, as some feminist scholars have argued, and then what? And part of my reading Exodus 20-23, I say, well, actually the text is constructing a utopian society. They're setting down these laws, they're setting down these instructions of how they are to live under God. And I think there is a real persuasive idea that we can understand this as creating a utopia. And that works in both ways. One, you get away from this kind of like dominant reading in biblical studies, and then you add to the kind of theological readings as well.
Very interesting. Thank you. It's not an approach I've come across before, and it sounds absolutely fascinating. What are your plans then for the summer, and how will HAPS funding help you with those?
So really, my plan is to kind of finish. I have
It's a good plan.
It's a really good plan, and fingers crossed it all goes to plan. But October is when I need to finish this PhD. And what has happened at the minute is that I was involved in really great projects, but I've had to step away from them because of this kind of pressure on the PhD, pressure on me, as we're all aware. Prices for everything have gone through the roof, and actually being able to finish my PhD without kind of having pauses for jobs would be wonderful. Particularly one thing I'm really interested in and really passionate about is I help with my friends run a podcast called Ancient Afterlives about the ancient world, and interviewing early career researchers and PhD students about their research and why it matters. Why does the ancient world matter today? Some might say similar in scope to Digital Hammurabi, but I would claim that
we are sisters in the podcasting YouTube network, and I love Ancient Afterlives and love what you guys are doing.
And I love it too. It's the best thing to ask people about their research and hear about it, especially when you, in the PhD, you just get so stuck into what you're doing and kind of your dominant conversations. So it's been the best thing about it, but I've really had to step away from that in the last couple of months just because I've had to take on more work. So one thing I would love to do with the funding is actually come back into that and say no to more hours, because it's actually really important. I'm really passionate about education engagement. I think that there's no point of doing the research if you can't communicate that to people, if you can't tell other people why this is a really exciting field, or why people should be more interested in particularly religious studies and biblical studies, and not just kind of dismiss it, even if you are from kind of a secular background as, oh, it's the Bible, it doesn't matter. Actually, there's really cool and nerdy scholarship going on and really interesting conversations to be had. So I'd love to use the funding as a way to be able to step back into that.
Well, that sounds like both excellent goals. And regardless of what happens, I really hope you get to finish the PhD sooner rather than later, because it is very expensive, and when it drags on, it is it's quite demoralizing. So fingers crossed that is a possibility for you. What so you're hopefully finishing quite soon. What are your plans after, if you manage to graduate? What are your plans?
This is the dreaded question.
I know, I'm sorry.
On the one hand, I've got an idea for a postdoc project which build on the work I've done previously in the Book of Esther. Outside my PhD interests, I've published on Esther in kind of both post-colonial studies, but also from a drag approach. And I would really like to pick that back up again. I think there are more questions that I could ask. And I've got a little postdoc project in the back of the notebook that I would love the chance to explore, but obviously academia at the minute is not the best. But if not, I've been working in educational engagement at my university for the last 2 years, and it's something that's been the best part of my PhD. I would love to develop that more and to make sure that everyone has access to university education, background they're from, especially religious studies, which is often wrapped up in kind of ivory tower kind of dominated in, just these are the kind of two plans at the minute, but either way, I would be very happy to explore both of them.
Fantastic. And when you say drag studies, am I understanding like drag queen?
Yeah.
Amazing. You have to tell me about that.
I co-wrote an article with a friend about Mordecai as a drag queen when he comes out of this. And there's, if anyone is interested in drag studies in the Bible, there's been stuff on Jail in Judges 4 and 5. I think of top Queen of Sheba sometimes, and Kat Quine and Laura Quick have an edited volume with Hebrew studies coming out that's going to look at drag in the Bible a bit more. So keep your eyes peeled for that if you are interested.
Okay, I've never heard of drag studies, and that sounds absolutely amazing.
It's a great excuse to watch Drag Race and call it work, but it is really a great field and really, really fascinating.
Amazing. Okay, so those are the pre-prepared questions that I send out. So audience, if you're watching and you have questions for Katherine, please do put them in the chat. We'll kind of chat a little bit more, and then if we don't get anything, I will let her go and get about the rest of her day. What impact do you see, or do you hope your PhD thesis will have on the scholarship of the Bible and Exodus specifically?
Well, there's two ways to answer that. One, I hope it contributes to this kind of really exciting time that Utopian Studies in the Bible is having at the minute. There's a new consultation panel opened up at SBL, so Society of Biblical Literature, which is our big biblical studies society, and it opened the second year of my PhD. And I've been really fortunate to kind of contribute to those conversations in the kind of academic sense. I'd like it to be the start of an ongoing conversation of Utopian studies, and people can see the interest, not least because Utopian studies is often forgotten because it's got quite a Marxist history, which means that religion is sidelined frequently. But that's where I'd hope it would directly impact, and I can see the impact happening. But on the other hand, I would just kind of like to bring a new set of eyes to Exodus 20 to 23. I think that it's, having read all the all the commentaries and all the articles that talk about it, it would be really lovely to have a new reading that might provoke different ways of thinking about these texts, or promote different conversations that we can have, particularly thinking, I touch briefly on gender in my PhD. That's not often a conversation we have beyond the address of the Decalogue with Talia Brenner. Those questions, what what's brought into it there, thinking about who's excluded in this community, particularly as the Ten Commandments is often lauded as this universal address, but actually it's addressing quite a specific group. What does that mean? But yeah, just kind of really bringing a new, fresh approach to the text. I think I would like to think that was what my PhD would do, and hope to provoke further conversations or new approaches from other scholars who get to read it.
Well, thank you very much. We have not had any audience questions. I think everyone is maybe just waking up. It's a little bit early over here on the East Coast of the United States. So Katherine, before we let you go, is there anything that you would like to share that we haven't touched on, or something you would like to go back and elaborate on?
I don't think so. I mean, if anyone has any questions, if not, I think that if anyone's kind of not convinced by utopia and science fiction, or utopia and the Bible, you should go back and read how many utopian science fiction texts use the Bible and then flip it round and say we can do it the other way around. But yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us about your research. It sounds very exciting. And I will be in touch in a few days to let everyone know what the next steps are.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katherine. Bye. That was Katherine. She is working on utopian studies, specifically the concept of utopia in Exodus. I didn't know that was a thing. I've said that like 5 times already today, so we're off to a good start. I'm learning a lot of things, and hopefully you all are too. We are going to take a brief break. We will be back at 10:30 with our next guest. That is approximately 15 minutes. So go have a walk around, get a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and I will see you in a couple of minutes. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to our HAPS interviews. This is the final round of interviews before our donors get to vote and make the decision about which of our scholars get funding. So we have our next guest. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon from Berlin.
Wonderful. Could you please introduce yourself and tell everyone where you are studying?
Yes, of course. I am Daniele Zampirin, as you can see on the name, and I'm right now studying in Berlin. My PhD is here at the Freie University of Berlin. My background is a little bit all over Europe. I had my bachelor in the Netherlands in Leiden, and my master spread a little bit between Portugal, Italy, and Greece. So I have a little bit of a variety of experience.
Just a little. And what fields are you researching?
Right now, my topic is on the Indian Ocean Trade Network in antiquity. So everybody is familiar with the Silk Road system in medieval time because of Marco Polo, but and a little bit of the trade system in medieval time in the Indian Ocean. But I'm focusing on an antiquity period. So In that time, the Romans were able to trade with the Indian subcontinent and vice versa through the Indian Ocean. And that's my topic.
Thank you. And when you are looking at this particular area of research, what evidence generally are you working with? Is it textual or archaeological or a mixture of both?
I'm working mainly with ceramics. That is because if we consider the big variety of climate and environments that there are in the Indian Ocean, it's difficult to have material that is well preserved in all different environments except for ceramics. So if I want to study the trade network, ceramics is the best option right now to look at and investigate.
And how do ceramics help you better understand this particular trade network?
Well, ceramics in the past is more or less like plastic nowadays. So they were using it in very diverse way, and it's well preserved generally, and it helps to understand what type of material were traded because they were the containers, and at the same time, sometimes they were the material that was traded. And once they arrived at the place where they are used and deposited, it will stay there and we find it there. So it's easy to find it. And once you know enough about the ceramics you're working with, you're also able to pinpoint from where it comes from.
Fantastic, thank you. And where do you find these ceramics? Are they in obviously archaeological excavations? Do you have to work with unprovenance looted materials? What kinds of resources are we looking at?
My focus is on archaeological site in Oman called Korori. So I'm working mainly with the ceramics that has been excavated or is being excavated right now at the site. But of course, for the topic that I'm dealing with and for the final aim that I have, which is building a database of the trade network, I'm working not only with the ceramics from that side, but also I hope and I'm trying to implement ceramics from different sites. Of course, you have to understand we are dealing with an environment that goes from Egypt to India, from the Persian Gulf to East Africa. So it's very diverse and very open, like very dynamic environment. So I hope to include in my database ceramics from different sites, and for that I'm right now at the first year of my PhD, so I'm focusing on the networking, getting to know the excavators and the professors that are working in the different sites.
That sounds like it will end up being a very large amount of material.
It will be. I mean, for my master thesis, I already worked with material from Kotori, and that was already a big amount of it. And I mean, a big number of ceramic pieces, and yet a very, very small percentage of the material that we are looking at. And the time span is also very long. I'm dealing from the 3rd century BCE to the 5th century CE, which means nearly 1,000 years, 800 years. So it's very long time, and you can imagine that the material accumulated in that long time, it's quite big.
So using the ceramics, then, are you able to get an idea of how the trade network changed over the course of those 800 years?
Exactly, that's the main objective, because we have few literature sources that talk about the trade. The most famous one is Periplus Maria di Prei. We don't know the author yet, but it's a Roman text describing how to get from Egypt to India and from India back to Egypt. But it doesn't really give us an idea of how it evolves. It's a point of view of a trader at that specific moment, and we are dealing for on a span that is 800 years. So that changed a lot over time. Ceramics, thanks to their deposition in different layers, does help a lot in understanding which side of the trade was more active at the beginning, let's say, which one more at the end. For example, the site I'm working, Korori, you can already see that the first few centuries of occupation, Roman material was very common together with Indian material, but then towards the end of the occupation of the site, there's hardly any Roman material left. Instead, there's much more material coming from the Persian Gulf. So there is a change in the dynamic.
Mhm.
And the project aims to understand it, but in a much broader way.
Mm-hmm. And you said that one of the things that was traded was the ceramics themselves. Do we know what the other ceramics would have housed for trade?
Yeah, there's the list is extremely long and it's not yet complete. There's some words actually in the Peritus Marievitae that are still not understood. They talk about some goods that are traded that we don't know what goods they are. But let's say that the most common thing exported by the Romans was wine and garum a little bit. On the other side, from the South Arabia area, the most common goods traded was actually frankincense, essence that you perfume the house and so on. And from India, the most common things were the spices. Actually, pepper is one of the most common things traded. And for example, in Berenike in Egypt, they found a jar containing 7.5 kilos of pepper from 2,000 years ago. And there's evidence of peppers in some Roman forts in UK and in Germany. So it was very well spread in the empire and was extremely important trade for the Indians. But of course, not only pepper, silk is also mentioned as traded, and yeah, gemstones, pearls, and so on. It's very long trade, a very long list of traded goods.
Thank you. What then are your plans for this summer, and how will HAPS funding help you?
The plans for my summer are very complicated. As I told you, I'm trying to build up a network and getting in touch with people that are working in the topic that I'm working on. And for that, I will be attending a lot of conferences this summer. I have one planned for July related to the Red Sea. It's in Crete. Then there's going to be one in Berlin here in August, and another one in Venice, with which I will go with a team from the Netherlands. And then I will be going to another conference in Budapest in September. And despite the fact that conference is extremely good and they help you to build up a very solid network, they're also traveling and finding an accommodation is quite expensive, especially because it's the summer after COVID, so everybody wants to travel right now.
Everyone's going, yeah.
Yeah. So the funding would be extremely helpful for me to finance this traveling and these accommodation issues.
Well, thank you very much. I don't have any more questions, and we don't have anything from the audience. Is there anything that you would like to add or maybe elaborate on before we let you go?
Yeah, I would like just to underline how underestimated the trade network in India is, in the Indian Ocean is, because most of the attention is focused on the Silk Road, because of course you have much more material and much more study going on. But you have to imagine that if in the Silk Road you're traveling with caravans, and like you have some material, but not that much. In the Indian Ocean, you're traveling with boats, and of course, once you travel with a boat, you try to fill as much material as you can in it. So the quantity and the implications of such a trade in the past are very much underestimated. And there's not enough going on right now, enough studies going on the sites. Some sites are still not being found, and so it's much needed. The attention is much needed, and this opportunity for me to talk about it is a great opportunity to maybe find someone else that is willing to help us.
That's all excellent points. I think something that is often overlooked, especially in and maybe the popular depictions of the ancient world is quite how vital trade was to, well, the whole ancient world and the different societies that operated within it. And I think this kind of work not only helps with our academic understanding of it, but it helps to shine light on it for those who are interested but not necessarily working in the fields of study that we are.
Yeah, and it's a great example of integration. In Berenike, in Egypt, you have a Buddha statuette that has been found, and you have evidences of people living Indian people living in Egypt. So it's a very nice example of integration in the past, which is something that we still need to learn nowadays.
Absolutely, and it's. Trade is always very interesting to me because it is such an excellent illustration of cultural contact and how people work together and interact and kind of exchange ideas and as well as goods and commercial items.
Yeah, but also simply the awareness of having people across the ocean. The Romans talk about the country. No, the Chinese talk about a country far, far in the west, which is believed to be the Romans. Indians talk about the people from the west bringing gold and gifts. So there's awareness of cultures, different cultures, far away from yourself, and some people just wanted to reach that culture and trade with them. It's impressive.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your research. It really does sound fascinating.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Of course, and I will be in touch in a couple of days to let everybody know what happens next. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. I love trade. Trade is the best thing in the whole entire world. And if you are a return viewer, you'll have heard me talk about the Old Assyrian period and the trade networks there, and the international trade that happened during the Amarna period between Egypt and Cyprus and Mesopotamia, and wonderful. Love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you everybody for watching. And thank you very much to Native Atheist. I don't at all think you're a knuckle dragger, but you're very welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you in the chat. And if you are watching and you would like to donate to HAPS, you can send a super chat or you can donate via the HAPS website. All of the details are running across the bottom of your screen. And as a reminder, everybody who donates to HAPS gets to vote on the research that they would most like to see funded. I don't choose it. Josh doesn't choose it. The HAPS board of directors don't choose. It's the donors. So if you have seen any research that you think, yes, this definitely is important, we should be funding this, send a donation. Doesn't matter how much or how little. You will get a vote to choose who has the money. So thank you all very much. We will be back. What's the time? 10:44. We will be back at 11 in approximately 15 minutes with our next interview. So don't go anywhere.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for sticking with us. We are going to get started with our next interviewee. So without further ado, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for allowing me to be here, Megan. Thank you very much. How are you?
Oh, it's lovely to see you. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Great, thank you. You can hear me all right?
Yes, perfectly.
Fantastic.
Could you maybe start by introducing yourself and telling everyone where you are a student?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Aslam Cohen Mizrahi. I am a student, Ph.D. student at the University of Chicago Divinity School in Hebrew Bible.
Thank you. And what are your particular research interests?
So I am currently writing a dissertation on biblical narrative, and I have deliberately chosen three different narrative works in the Hebrew Bible that come from the different from the traditionally tripartite division of the Bible. We have the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, that is the Pentateuch, the prophets, and the writings. And actually, each one of these, this is not a generic distinction. This is what I'm saying. All of these contain narrative works, and one of the and so what I do is I take every one of these stories and I analyze the way in which they are told. I think that the way in which stories are told in the Hebrew Bible is, for many reasons, one of the widely underappreciated aspects of the Hebrew Bible. So that's sort of the general scope of the project.
Thank you. Is there, when you're looking at narrative in the Hebrew Bible, are there particular ways that narrative is used that is maybe distinct from other Near Eastern texts?
Absolutely. So I believe that when the three works that I look at are the priestly history, which is one of the documents that's embedded in the Pentateuch and what we call the Pentateuch, but it is really a distinctive narrative source that tells a story from creation to the establishment of the tabernacle in the Holy Land. The book of Ezekiel, which is a first-person retrospective story told by this prophet about his encounters with the deity, and the story of Job, which many of your listeners will be familiar with. And what I'm interested in is that I believe that the way in which these stories are told communicates something about their conceptions of power and violence. So, to your question about how this differs from other ancient Near Eastern modes of telling, when you have a sovereign telling stories or telling about their own feats in the ancient Near East, you always have that first-person voicing, right? In inscriptions from Egypt to Babylon and Assyria, this is the first-person voicing, is the controlling voice of the text. What you get in the priestly history, for instance, is that you have an author who's very, very committed to this idea of divine sovereignty, very much in the ancient Near Eastern mode. But instead of having the narrator, the deity talk about this in the first person, the sovereign talk about this in the first person, you have the construction, the deliberate literary construction of a narrative voice that subordinates itself to the voice of the narrator, so that you have that very memorable kind of narrative pattern that most of your listeners will be familiar with. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, right? So the voice of the deity takes the central piece of the story, but you have the creation of a narrative voice that only exists there as a kind of an echo of that divine voice. And my argument is that is really mirroring what that text has as an idea of priesthood, right? Priests are supposed to be inconspicuous servants of the deity, who are sort of echoing his will and doing everything at his behest, but without really showing their presence there. They're really just like puppets there. And this is the way in which the story is told, even is constructed in this way. So it is an extraordinarily sophisticated and I think underappreciated aspect of this work, for instance, right? And so the way in which these reflects conceptions of authority and power and violence is that you have these character who's dictating the terms of the story, right? Even if the narrator is the voice that controls any story, right? The voice of the narrator is always the voice that controls the story. That voice chooses to subordinate itself. And I think that choice of subordination is something that communicates also something about the nature of the violence that is implied here, right? You as a human being, you as a vehicle of the deity, you have to subordinate itself to that position of the sovereign. And in Ezekiel, you see that with particular poignancy, because you have a first-person retrospective telling of a story, but that narrator, I don't know how many people will remember that in Ezekiel, you begin with the Ezekiel swallowing a divine scroll that is sort of imposed by the deity, right? So you have this kind of sense of violation of personal voice, right? The individual's voice has to be eradicated in order for it to be a proper vehicle of the deity. And finally, in Job, what you have is a kind of upturning of the tables, right? So this is what in Job, you have an example of how rich and diverse is the literary tradition in ancient Israel, because you have a kind of critique of this model of divine sovereignty, right? A kind of caricature of it, effectively. So I'm afraid I may have gone on for a little bit long.
No, that was perfect. And I'm a huge fan of ancient literature, and the ways in which people choose to write is very fascinating to me. And I think that what you're saying is very, very interesting, that it's not just the actions that are recounted in the book, it's how the actions are spoken about and described that kind of almost subliminally reinforces this conception of the deity as all powerful and overwhelming, and forces the human agency almost to the background.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's the water in which we swim always when we're listening to a story. It's sort of, the natural landscape is, we often take that voice for granted, but it really reveals something very interesting about it. Already Plato, by the way, some of your listeners may be aware that, Plato had Socrates expel the poets, and really he meant the storytellers from the city in the Republic. But if you look at those passages, what he is really arguing for is a control for the way in which stories are told. And what he doesn't like is stories that contain many voices within them. And this is the way in which you have these translated in the ancient literary tradition in Israel and Judah, which is you have voices internal to the text. You have the creation of a story world, but within that story world, you have that singular voice. In the priestly history, for instance, that voice sort of overwhelms everybody, including the voice that tells the story. So that's a little bit of the idea of my research. Yeah.
Thank you. What are your summer plans then, and how can HAPS help you with them?
So I will be working on precisely this chapter on the priestly history, on certain demarcating the particular ways in which these stories told enforces this presentation of the central character as a divine monarch who's kind of larger than life, and how that is made possible literarily. And this is the focus of the chapter that I am currently working on. Unfortunately, I have a 3-year-old son.
Yep. I have a 4-year-old. I absolutely understand the sentiment there.
The slip was revealing, so I'm sorry, but I have this 3-year-old son, and so he needs to go to summer camp or something because mom works full time, and I'm not getting a stipend from the university for the summer. So I am in need of some funding for that to happen, and really for that work to be possible. So yeah.
No, I completely understand. And for those who have not tried to work on an intensive research project with a 3, 4, 5-year-old running around in the background, you are very lucky. This is a very real problem for an awful lot of PhD students. And it's why HAPS exists, because people need help over the summer, and whether it's traveling to a conference or getting childcare so that you can actually just sit down and write your thesis, is both are very, very real struggles. So
yeah, I appreciate
understood.
your sensibility to this. Yeah. Yeah.
No, people ask, well, they don't ask, but I tell them, why has nothing happened with Digital Hammurabi for the past couple of years? Well, because I don't have childcare. And much as I love my 3 small children, it is virtually impossible to get any kind of research done with them in the house.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yes, I understand. When you've finished the chapter you're working on this summer, what are your plans for the rest of the PhD? Are you kind of progressing well, or do you think it'll be a little bit before you're finished?
I am done with everything I've had to do. I fulfilled the teaching requirements. I'm really just just intentionally working very, very hard in trying to get these to write the dissertation and graduate in the fall of next year. That's the goal. So I'll be dedicating the summer to the these P chapter. Then I will be writing the chapter on Ezekiel. Then I'll be writing the chapter on Job. And then I'll have some time for introduction and conclusion, and that's the idea.
That's wonderful.
But everything's been progressing well so far. We hope it continues that way. Yeah.
If I can ask, what got you interested in looking at narrative?
So I've always been very interested in narrative and philosophy. I studied philosophy back in Mexico when I was doing my undergrad, and I would also go with my father to synagogue, and we would look at the weekly readings from the Pentateuch, and I had little knowledge of Hebrew then, but already I could tell there was something deeply interesting, and just the structure of the sentences, the aesthetic of it was very pleasing to me, and I felt was very different from other kinds of storytelling modes that I knew from elsewhere, and so that's how I decided to get into these topics. Now it's more really related to a kind of, I think there is a need to develop critical perspective around how stories are told in the Hebrew Bible. And I mean, part of the reason I think this has been neglected is because of the predominant, scriptural mode in which we tend to read the Hebrew Bible, which is the scriptural mode is really a narrative mode. It's a mode in which there is an external voice telling you a series of truths. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, truth number 1, and then truth number 2, right? And it is communicating those truths to you, notwithstanding the historical context, right? And when we historicize these texts, I think the results are profoundly interesting, not because they are, democratizing. I don't think that the priestly history is probably the most fanatically monarchical text in the history of it's really a profoundly committed to an idea of divine sovereignty and the view of humanity as kind of just shadow figures in the background. But I think, pointing to that is itself a kind of contribution, because we tend to value, just because of the way we're brought up, the biblical text is kind of the locus for ethical reflection. And I think, this has to be questioned, right? Because when you have a story about the flood, where, for instance, in the priestly history, there is not even a recognition of the universal Holocaust that is implied there, precisely because the only thing that matters to the way in which this story is told is the deity, right? It is really the deity is the central figure there, right? And if he wants to restart the world and he wants to erase everything that was before, there is really no concern, no sympathy for that kind of human figure, right? So it is a kind of humanistic project in that sense, because I think in Job, finally, you have the voice of humanity finally kind of rising up from those ashes, right? Because the sovereign model is so unsustainable as it's played out, at least in the literary imagination, right? You see how oppressive it would be, particularly in the case of Ezekiel. And so even a servant who's committed to obeying the will of the sovereign, as in the case of Job, he has to sort of give in under pressure ultimately, and you have this extraordinary space that's given in the story of Job after he's oppressed and oppressed and oppressed to his own voice and his own perspective on what's happening to him. And I think that's sort of a momentous text in the history of ancient Israel for that reason.
Thank you. And I think you're touching on something that one of our previous guests was talking about also, the importance and maybe the necessity of studying the Hebrew Bible regardless of your own religious beliefs or convictions, because it is such a central foundational entity, I think, for a lot of modern societies, and having a greater understanding of it as a literary work and in the manner that you're describing, I think is very, very important.
It just so happens that, like to your point, that very first line, the priestly history ended up for, hazardous historical reasons at the beginning of what we call the Hebrew Bible. And that first line, what we understand to be the first line of the Hebrew Bible, is actually, as Rashi, as a medieval commentator, understood a while ago, it's really a misunderstanding of the syntax of the Hebrew Bible to read, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." And if that line, in the way in which sort of pervades the Western imagination of everybody, sitting around me, and the way in which that sort of marks the whole tone of how we think about biblical texts, if we don't really reformulate that and put those we put that in terms in which the proper historical context is understood, I think we're sort of perpetuating a lot of the prejudices around the religious authority of these texts. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. This has been fascinating. We don't have any audience questions. Is there anything that you would like to highlight or elaborate on?
There is. I think one of the contributions is also theoretical in my dissertation. The question of narrative mode has been, of course, investigated by literary theorists from many different perspectives. But I think that the question of authority in narrative voicing is sort of briefly touched on in Plato, and that it's sort of neglected for centuries. And then you come back to it with the Russian theoretician Mikhail Bakhtin, who will play a central role in the development of my argument, because he is the first one to really attend to the narrator's voice as a possible site of conflict and a possible site of the perpetuation of the character's personality, right? So he's the first one to really recognize that a narrator, even though he's the controlling voice of the story, he may adopt the character's language to tell a story, so that it's not only that you're representing a character with who speaks in this way and views the world in X and Y way, but you're also constructing a narrator who adopts that very same perspective as a character, and that creates a whole set of literary effects that I think are very much part of what we are looking at in biblical texts. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Asam. It was a pleasure talking with you again. And I'll be in touch in a couple of days to let everyone know what happens next.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was Aslan. He is looking at narrative structure in the Hebrew Bible. I love talking about ancient literature. I love it. It's wonderful. So that was very enjoyable for me, hopefully very enjoyable for you. We are now going to be taking a break until our next guest arrives at 12:30 EDT. That is an hour and 10 minutes. So please go have some lunch, enjoy a little bit of a break, and I will be back at 12:30. Oh, mic was down. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. We are going to finish up all of our HAPS interviews this afternoon. We have 4 more to get through, and we are joined by our next guest. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Could you please introduce yourself and tell everyone where you are currently a student?
Yeah, my name is Ransom Portis. I'm currently studying Hebrew Bible, Old Testament at Princeton Theological Seminary in New
Thank
Jersey.
you. And what's your personal specialization?
My personal specialization is the divine counsel in the Old Testament. So, yeah, and this kind of falls within a broader category of divinity in the Bible and the ancient Near East.
Wonderful. And what is it about the divine counsel that made you want to write a dissertation on it?
Well, that is a great question. I mean, I think this is a question partly that I've come to recognize just about my own past and the part of the work that's the me search, I guess. Part of dissertating, I suppose. And yeah, I've just kind of come to recognize that a lot of this work for me comes out of questions I have about just difference and how we negotiate difference and how we kind of recognize difference and how it comes to shape our understanding of religion and divinity really in our own religious beliefs and practices. So
Thank you.
yeah, I think that'll kind of some of those themes will come out here as I start to describe my own work.
Perfect. Are you focusing on particular passages in the Hebrew Bible, or is it more a wide-ranging study that looks at the divine counsel in the whole text?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's much more the latter. Of course, there are definitely some passages that people hone in on, of course, that have been really important for the study of the divine counsel. Obvious ones that come to mind are Job 1, Psalm 82, 1 Kings 22. These are of course very important texts. But I draw widely from the Old Testament and the ancient Near East more broadly.
Thank you. And for those who are watching who are maybe not familiar with it, what exactly is the divine counsel, and how does it show up in the Old Testament?
Yeah, this is a very important question. The divine counsel, I think this is one of the contributions I make is specifically kind of theorizing what this is and what we're thinking about here. I think when you look at some scholarship tends to give the impression that it's like a type scene or this is kind of a literary thing when it's in the Old Testament. It's definitely an aspect of religion and kind of just the broader worldview. And kind of, I think there are some questions that remain to be answered about what exactly it is that this does. I think there are some themes that are attached to it in literature, but it's definitely part of a kind of broader worldview and a model for conceptualizing divinity really throughout the ancient Near East at certain points. One of the struggles, of course, in talking about it in the Bible is the fact that it's kind of it certainly draws deeply from a kind of polytheistic model of divinity, but these passages, they then show up, of course, in a dominantly monotheistic canon, of course, or a canon that's, of course, deeply impacted by monotheistic rhetoric, I suppose.
Thank you. And you've mentioned a couple of times the wider ancient Near Eastern context. Is a divine counsel something that we see in other cultures in the ancient Near East as well?
Man, you just have all the best questions. Yes, and this is I think an important contribution that I find that I am making in this kind of divine counsel research. I think is taking a rigorously comparative approach and really just drawing from just how broadly this divine counsel model is for conceptualizing divinity, particularly, especially in the late Bronze Age, but even earlier. It's like an administrative metaphor. It's a patriarchal metaphor for divinity. But yeah, they show up everywhere. They show up from, of course, Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium, Egypt, Hittites, and then even up into the Aegean, in Homer, and then of course in the Levant, and certainly Ugaritic and everything too. So yeah, we have divine councils everywhere. One of the questions there though is like, okay, well, what's a divine council? Is it anywhere 2 or more gods meet together? Are we calling this a divine council or something? Well, no, I think we have to hone in on that question a little bit more. But yeah, they're everywhere.
So how would you answer that question then? How do you go about identifying a divine council?
That is another great question. So at least what I do, at least my take on it is I'm basically just focusing in on lexemes for council. Lexemes for council that, and sometimes it's divine council, but really just lexemes that are used for the council of the gods. And so the most important one of these lexemes is, in Mesopotamian context, is a pukru. And you may be familiar. It's a very well-known study by a Syriologist of the past generation, Thorvald Jakobsen. And he wrote this essay called Primitive Democracy. And he's basically just tracking the term pukru. And really even it shows up even well beyond Mesopotamian context. It shows up, it's in a catagram in Hittite context. So of course translates into Sumerian. And then it also shows up in Ugaritic. So way over in the Levant here. So pukru is an incredibly important lexeme here when we're thinking about the divine council. It does not show up in the Bible. Despite there's one person who wants to see it in the Bible, it's not. But the Bible has its own terms for councils. So terrestrial or divine councils. So the most, maybe the most interesting one in the biblical text is going to be Psalm 82. You have the Edat El, the Edat El, which is the assembly of the gods, really, or divine assembly, or assembly of El, you could say. And you have all kinds of problems here with translating this this word El, whether it's a personal name or it's just a word for just general divinity.
Descriptor.
Yeah, exactly. So we have lots of questions there that remain. Oh, we have an intruder here.
I had one of those pop in earlier as well. He gave me a broken ruler, which was very helpful.
Yes. But then, but I think what we find is that we have besides this term pukru that's used more widely in this kind of ecumenical maybe sense of a divine council, we also have kind of more indigenous terms. Hey, give me 1 second. Here. Hey, Natalie. Go get mama. So we also have these more kind of indigenous local terms for assemblies. The Hittites have this Tulia divine council, and then the Israelites have a handful of different terms that can be used for councils. You have this Edat council. You also have a Kahal council that gets used for the assembly of the gods. Those are the main ones.
Thank you very much. We have a question from the audience. Is there some significant difference between the divine council, which was given by the Mesopotamian gods, and the God of the Hebrew Bible?
Yeah.
Which I think is understanding counsel as advice or wisdom rather than a group.
Yes. This is
what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I think this is an interesting question. You know, so yeah, one of the issues you raise here is, you know, an English spelling issue here. So what is a council? And we can just talk about that. This is an important question. So like, what is the council? And certainly council with an S is an important aspect of the divine council with a C. And this is the model here is an administrative model, which is, yeah, so the way to think of this is, you know, around the 3rd and 4th millennium, we have city states, you know, just popping up, and we have growing administrations. And what's happening is divinity is at this point also getting kind of reconceptualized in the human imagination to kind of mirror the administrative context that, you know, we're just growing up in, and that we're just kind of baking in, that we're swimming in one way or another. And and so in this administrative context, there are kind of administrative elites. You have, you know, kinds of rulers and the ruler's advising body. And you know, so yeah, what it is you have, it's administrative elites basically, and the decisions that they make on behalf of the people. It's a representative government in some way or another. In terms of the question about difference, so let me go back and finish that one more time. One more little wrinkle here. The most basic, if you want to boil it down to what the council does, I think Jakobson, this guy that initially formulated, he says it's basically a court of law, and it makes and unmakes kings, more or less. And it also makes like really important decisions about like whether we're going to go to war or not. Decisions about war and peace. And in that respect, I think there are some very important parallels to draw with there are very important parallels to draw there between the Mesopotamian councils and the divine council in the Old Testament. Of course, differences there are going to be that the kind of modifications, of course, for the Israelite context. Not always, though. These modifications, the kind of more monotheistic elements of it, are going to be more or less pronounced in different contexts. You know, so sometimes it's, you know, it's the Old Testament it's clearly talking about the gods, you know. So what I'm wanting to lift up here is, just that the Old Testament is not uniform in its presentation of divinity here.
Can we identify, when we're looking at the Hebrew Bible, can we identify who else is on the divine council, or is it too opaque to really get at that?
That's a great question. You know, one that comes to mind here is Deuteronomy 32:8. This is a fascinating text that people have known about for a long time. This is not a secret. But Deuteronomy 32:8, it talks about when Elyon kind of let's just pull it up real quick and we'll read it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so in English translations, this Elyon is going to be the Most High. So when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. According to the number of the sons of Israel, and then verse 9 is, and the Lord, Yahweh's own portion was his people, Jacob his allotted share. So what I translated there was the Hebrew Masoretic text. But what people have pointed out for a long time now is the old Greek translation of this of this text says when Elyon is dividing up, he's dividing up the peoples. It's according to the number of the sons of God. So, and then not only that, when, this is at Qumran now, then we found a fragment from the Qumran manuscripts that also kind of corroborates this reading. So it preserves an older version of this kind of myth about kind of the origins of nations and how nations have these tutelary deities. Each has their own, and all the peoples of the world are kind of divided up according to the number of the sons of God. Yeah, the Qumran text says according to the number of the B'nai Elohim, according to the number of the sons of God. It's related to the celestial Sanhedrin found in the Kabbalah. You mentioned the Sanhedrin, this Sanhedrin. This relates to the number 70, and exactly on this, the number of the sons of God in the Ugaritic texts, just north of Israel. The hop, skip, and a jump. You can almost throw a stone there. That's hyperbole. But the number of the sons of God is exactly 70 sons. So the sons of Athirat, who is the consort of El in the Ugaritic text, she has 70 sons, and the 70 sons are exactly these really make up the members of the Divine Council. So one model of the Divine Council is really this administrative model. A second model, especially at Ugarit, is really, it's modeled after the divine family, really, is what it is. And at the very top tier, you have El, you have the high god El, and you have his consort, Athirat. And then at the second, right below them, you have all the divine children. I've been talking for a while. Let's, go ahead and steer us. I lost you.
I'm muted. There we go.
Okay,
Sorry. I was saying I'm just here to facilitate you talking, so please don't apologize for talking. I also wanted to ask what your plans are for the summer and how HAPS can help you with that.
Oh, my plans for the summer. I have probably the most important research I have to do. The most important research I have to do for the summer is this kind of Egyptian section. I'll take this opportunity to solicit, free research from any Egyptologists out there working here. No, it's I'm a good way into my Egyptian stuff, but I'm certainly far from an Egyptologist. But yeah, HAPS funding, you saw that I'm drowning in babies, really.
Yeah.
So I might be able to get myself an extra day of daycare or so to do some research. Yeah.
Yeah. I have 1-year-old twins and a 4-year-old, so I feel the drowning in babies comment.
Yeah, you have a 4-year-old
very
and
much.
2 twins.
Yeah.
You say, ooh. My sister had twins. Yeah, you're feeling it right now. I see it.
It's a whole other level of baby related insanity.
Oh my God, it's intense, isn't it? That's great. It's good.
Well, I don't have any more questions, and the audience appears to be done as well. Is there anything else that you'd like to elaborate on or expand on that we didn't get to before?
I do have some stuff I think that's very interesting about the Divine Council. If let's see, I have a couple more minutes, don't I?
Oh yeah, you've got about 10 minutes if you need it.
Oh, wonderful. Then I've got plenty I'd love to share.
Please.
Yeah, so I think I'll use this opportunity to talk about, an interesting kind of contribution that I make to this discussion about the Divine Council. I want to say that there are a lot of, even recently, there have been a couple dissertations done on the Divine Council, even within the last couple of years. And so I just want to say that it continues to be an important concept that, we're still struggling to understand in just ancient Near Eastern studies. And I think one of the kind of important contributions that I make is this, is I kind of show, I think, a little bit of the contingency of our knowledge and how we've understood the divine counsel, and just how it's really the divine counsel in particular, just because of certain ways that it's charged in our culture and how whatever we kind of assimilate things and understand them. It yeah, it's been particularly subject to the vicissitudes of just discoveries and scholarly trends and stuff like this. So I kind of go through and just talk about how it's emerged in particularly comparative contexts, and this especially is shaped a lot of my approach. It's been like rigorously comparative, right? And so like as early as 1840, you have people in Homeric studies. I've got this guy, Carl Mueller, who's kind of doing some just very general kind of theorizing on the divine counsel in very introductory ways, but that continue to be influential, I think, as people continue to kind of theorize the divine counsel. They're drawing deeply from Homeric studies, especially before we have, especially before the end of the 19th century with Mesopotamian studies and George Smith and flood tablets and everything. Interesting thing is, post George Smith and decipherment of cuneiform and stuff, there at this moment, then what was initially the divine counsel being primarily kind of I should say in 1840, no one was really comparing biblical, the biblical text, divine counsel in the biblical text, to the the Olympian divine counsel or whatever. No one's doing this really kind of comparative work. I suspect because it's it's so charged with polytheism, right? And these these are more kind of there's a little more tension there, I think, at this time. They're kind of rigidly monotheistic, Old Testament, and in any case, when syllabic cuneiform is discovered, suddenly there's this like fascinating comparative context there, and all this is being compared with Mesopotamian studies, and then again. You have the Babel Bible controversies there too with Friedrich Delitzsch, stuff like that. But then also immediately after that, then you have the discovery of the Ugaritic text. And now, all of a sudden, the biblical text is being compared with Mesopotamian divine counsels, then Ugaritic divine counsels. And there's a bit of a crisis, right, in terms of, kind of identity and the kind of model of divinity that the Bible is drawing from. And there's a certain amount of phobia that's kind of infused in scholarly discourse about divinity. There's kinds of phobias. It's kind of overwhelmed with comparative contexts, and the Bible is kind of seems to the identity of the biblical revelation and its kind of uniqueness in some way. At least I think how a lot of scholars are experiencing it is as though it's under threat. And this kind of gets woven into some conceptualization of the divine counsel. A important scholar, G. Ernest Wright, in the context of biblical archaeology, certainly is saying things like the divine counsel is dangerous and it's a threat, to Israelite religion and stuff like that. So this is just kind of how it's getting conceptualized. And if I can keep going for another moment here, it's also wrapped up in some of these important discussions in the mid 20th century by important scholars like Albright and Ezekiel Kaufman, who are doing important kind of histories of monotheism and kind of conceptualizing Israelite religion in important ways. So then you see Albright really kind of digging his heels in and defending a certain model of sacred history of monotheism. And then you also have someone like Kaufman, who's saying like all this polytheistic language around. He doesn't hone in on the divine counsel, but all this kind of more polytheistic language, these different models of divinity other than monotheism, these are really just kind of fossils of the language. So yeah, all this to say, this is not where we are right now, right? Fortunately, a lot of this is not in vogue to talk about, do this kind of comparison. That's clear, tends to show a certain amount of kind of confessional concern. But yeah, all this to say is, there's a certain kind of contingency about how we kind of conceptualize divinity. And it's certainly changed quite a bit. Shows up in the Divine Council in important ways.
Well, thank you very much, Ransom. That was very interesting. And the Divine Council is one of those things that I've been aware of on the periphery as an Assyriologist. I know it exists. I know kind of how it plays out in Mesopotamia. But then looking at it in the Hebrew Bible is not something I've done. So I greatly enjoyed this and found it very interesting.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Of course. We will be in touch in a couple of days to let you know what the next steps are. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. This has been lovely. Appreciate all the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That was Ransom. He is looking at the Divine Council in the Hebrew Bible, specifically placing it in its ancient Near Eastern context, including Mesopotamia, Ugarit, and Egypt. I say this every time. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Love it. It's my privilege to hear about everyone's research, and I'm very glad to do it. We are going to take a 5-minute break, and we will be right back with our second guest of the afternoon. So go get a cup of tea, and we will be back. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. After a very brief break, we are ready to continue our interviews with our next guest. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Megan. How's it going?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Oh, I'm great.
Good. Could you introduce yourself and tell everyone where you're studying, please?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Christopher Slane. I am just got done with my third year in my coursework at Hebrew Union College in Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'm studying the history of biblical interpretation.
Oh, wonderful. So within that field, what's your particular research interest?
My particular research interests are in intertextuality and literary criticism. I'm also interested in womanist and feminist theological criticism. So
fantastic. Are you looking at any particular books of the Hebrew Bible or just the whole thing?
Well, I generally tend to start with the Pentateuch, with the first 5 books of the Bible, and then move from there. So with intertextuality, usually we think of the first 5 books as the first 5 books that were written, but actually when you look intertextually, you find out that actually the prophets and the Psalms actually are telling the stories, and then the people in the first 5 books of the Bible are adjusting them, which is really interesting. At least that's the theory of John Choi, who's one of the authors that I work with quite a bit, and he actually was a graduate of Hebrew Union College. And so, yeah.
Thank you. And when you say intertextuality, for those who maybe aren't familiar with it, could you explain a little what it is and then how you are personally using it?
Sure. So anytime you have 2 documents that you think are related to one another, then you're looking for intertextual connection. So that can, I mean, and a text can be anything. It can be a song. It could be a biblical passage. It could be a ancient Near Eastern law code. There are all kinds of different things. So so when you're looking at 2 things and you're saying, does one of them allude to the other one, or does it echo the other one? Is there a reference to it, or is it even taking something and adjusting it and making it something new? So that's what intertextuality is, looking for connections between things.
And then how are you using it in your research?
So how I'm using it in my research, especially for this project. So what I'm doing this summer is I'm presenting a paper, a literary critical analysis of Exodus 16 at the International Society of Biblical Literature conference in Salzburg. And so the way intertextuality is working there is I have this passage in Exodus 16, and I look at it and I say it's a miracle passage. And I look at how this miracle shows up here in Exodus 16, and then I look at how it's in the Psalms and Nehemiah and things like that. And I say, wait, are these the same? Or are there differences? Are they subtle differences, or are they like really, really impactful differences?
Interesting.
Yeah,
sorry.
really, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you're looking at things like that and you're trying to work out if passages are connected, what are some of the things that you look for?
So you can look for verbal cues, but for this particular project, it's actually I'm looking at the story themselves. So when Nehemiah talks about this miracle that happens in the wilderness, it's the manna and the quail. There's several miracles that happen in the wilderness as the Hebrew people are, they have escaped Egypt, and they're waiting to get to the promised land, and they start to grumble because things aren't the way they were in Egypt. Even though things were hard in Egypt, they're like, oh no, let's go back there because at least we had food to eat. At least we had water to drink. So this passage is like, they're like, God, send us back to Egypt. We at least had bread and meat to eat. And so then there's this miracle. Moses says, okay, well, let me ask God what to do. And so God sends manna and quail, so bread and meat. Well, if you look at Nehemiah, if you look at the Psalms, when they talk about the miracles that happened in the wilderness, A, they're really vague, and B, quail and manna never show up together.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you a kind of clue, like, well, that's a little strange. And then when I start to look at Exodus 16 and then Numbers 11, which is its kind of sister miracle, then in Exodus 16, there's manna and quail. It's the miracle. They get both, bread and meat. In Numbers 11, they get the meat again. And you're like, wait, what? Why all of a sudden they already have meat and it's supposed to keep going? Why do they have meat again?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was just agreeing. What, like, they've got meat? Why is there more meat now?
Yeah. So then that's how intertextuality helps. Is you say, okay, there's something fishy here. These are obviously referencing the same events or the same purported events.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here?
I see. Thank you. And your dissertation then is looking primarily at intertextuality between passages of the Bible, and not bringing in other literary texts from other times and places.
Yeah, at this point, not yet, because this story is so specific. Is so specific to the story, the narrative that the Hebrew people are telling about themselves. But actually, the other really big part of it is actually literary critical part, which is.
Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So once you find out that there's this like weird thing going on, how do you decide? Like, you can't just go and say, I don't agree with the Bible. I'm just going to say that I'm just going to knock these parts out, and I'm going to say this doesn't belong. So you have to have a way to talk about it, or a way to explore what is going on here. And so literary criticism helps you do that. And basically what it is there's this guy named Roland Barthes, and he says, and he just does regular literary criticism, not connected to the Bible. And he says that when you're looking at any story or like a motif, he's saying there are particular like hinges on which the story operates. And those are the main things. They're the things that function in the story, and everything else is just kind of details. So if you look at those like main like nuclei, or those main hinges, the things that function in the story, then you can kind of you bring the story down to its parts, and you can see how it's operating. So like a good example is, did you know that the little engine that could is the same motif as the Good Samaritan?
I didn't know.
Okay. So if you I was just thinking about, I was reading it to my sons the other day, and I was like, this is a Good Samaritan, which I wouldn't have thought of if I hadn't been looking at it like in a literary critical but basically, right, here's the story. So the Good Samaritan, right? This guy gets hurt. He's sitting there, he's helpless. One person shows up and says, I'm not going to help him. Second person shows up, says, I'm not going to help him, I'm too busy. Third person shows up, it's a Samaritan, I'm going to help him, and gets him the rest of the way. Well, if you look at the little engine that could, there's a train. It's taking toys to the other side of the hill for the good little boys and girls, and it gets broken down. First train comes by, says, I don't have time to help. Second train comes by, says, I'm way too important to help. Third train comes by and says, I'll help you get over the mountain. I think I can. It's the same story, but we don't think about it. When you break it down to its like functioning parts, you see that it's actually the same motif.
That's really interesting.
So that's what I try to do. What I'm trying to do with Exodus 16 is, you look at the miracle stories in the Bible and you say they have a particular pattern. And so then what you're looking for is, well, I want to break my passage down into that pattern, and does it fit? Because there are places where you can insert things, and it can either disrupt the pattern, or it can maintain the pattern, or it can just be negligible. It could just be some detail that's being added. But when you look at Exodus 16, you start seeing, what you actually see is repetitions of pieces of the story. And specifically to enter in things like there's a part of it where the miracle is the glory of the Lord showing up, and there's a part of it where the meat shows up, that's the miracle, and there's a part of it where the bread shows up, and that's the miracle. And when you break it down to its functional parts, they repeat those steps each time, which is really strange, and your brain goes, wait, that's crazy. Like, why did we all of a sudden have 3 miracles in a row with their own introduction of the miracle and their own kind of fulfillment of the miracle, and they're completely separate from one another if you're reading closely? And then you add the intertextuality, and all of a sudden you say, oh, now I have 2 pieces of the puzzle.
So what do you think is the function of that repetition then?
Well, I think that the function of the repetition is that you had people, editors. So the Bible was edited over a long, long period of time, and it didn't come to its final form. I mean, we finally have evidence that at least in 200 BCE around, when we have the Qumran discovery, that they're using a text that is basically the same as our Masoretic, our Hebrew text that we have. That's the one that we all know. But between, and scholars differ on when they think the Bible started to be written, but between 800 and 200, people were compiling it. It wasn't like this kind of like set in stone document. people are like, oh, I can adjust this kind of thing. I can tweak this. And so they received a story, or they received a set of stories, and they put them together. And when they're trying to edit them all together, then things happen, and people look at what another person wrote and they say, actually, when the little train that said, I think I can, I'd prefer if it said, I can if God wills it.
Mm-hmm.
So then when the editing happens, they add something in and they forget to take something out, or they don't think it's a violation because they're not thinking in our modern literary critical terms. They're not thinking, oh man, I did this miracle 3 times. Somebody 2,000 years ago is going to look at this and say, you did that miracle 3 times.
Excellent. Well, thank you for explaining it. You've mentioned that your summer plans this year are to present your paper. How will HAPS funding help you do that?
Yeah, so I'll be traveling from here in Cincinnati to Salzburg, and so the HAPS funding will actually be really crucial because as poor PhD students, and I do work part-time as a priest, but it's part-time. And my wife is also a priest, and she does work full time. But trying to logistically work out all that with all the rest of the things that are happening in life and all the rest of the funding needs, having HAPS funding will take the burden off of my family to fund this kind of this trip, because I have to pay for everything. There's no
there's no conference funding.
Hey, congratulations, come do this. We want to give you all the money.
Here's the money for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no. Well, that is a very necessary thing to be using the funding for. So I certainly hope we can help with that. Hang on, let me just see. There is an audience question. No, we do not have any audience questions, and you've actually answered everything that I wanted to ask you. Is there something that you would like to talk about more or elaborate on, or maybe something that we haven't touched on yet that you think is important?
Well, I think I said in my initial application, I mean, the reason that I'm passionate about this is because I think people look at the Bible as this kind of monolithic text that just zap, it's here. One day it wasn't here. The next day it was always the way it was. And nobody's ever done anything. It's infallible, it's ineffable. Nobody. Yeah. So and actually that kind of understanding, I think, of the text as, there's a recent book called, God, I think it's called, God Breathes, Why Can't I? And it's by Angela Parker, and it just came out, and she basically takes this idea of the infallibility of the Bible to task as this kind of white supremacist cover. And basically, when we recognize that there are a diversity of voices in the Bible that have different things, then we think about the Bible differently. And actually, the miracle of the Bible is not that it was some magical document that all of a sudden got here. And I'm sure that you've talked to a lot of the other people who have applied for this scholarship, who are saying, look, this comes from the A&E. This law code comes from Babylon. And as an Assyriologist, right, you're well versed in all these the ways that the ancient world was not just there weren't these little pockets that were just separate from one another, that they're all influencing each other. It was a big cultural experience that manifested itself in different ways. So actually recognizing that there are diversity of voices, I think, shows us how we can bring in diverse voices. And it still is meaningful, and it still provides hope for people, and it still gives them a deeper sense of what's true and what's meaningful and what their place is in this crazy universe. So that's why I'm passionate about it, because I think anything we can do to kind of tear down latent white supremacist systems, I think we should take those opportunities, and we should say, actually, things are a lot more complicated than you think.
I think that's a really important point, and it's something that has kind of popped up here and there during the interviews, and it's something that has come up in different videos that we've done. It's incredibly important to remember that actually the Bible, Hebrew Bible, was a product of its time and was written by all of, like you said, all of these different people, all of these different voices, and then compiled by even different other different people, and understanding it as that kind of glorious myriad of experiences, I think much more productive and maybe healthy. I'm not sure if healthy is the right term, but let's say healthy.
I think you can say healthy. I think it is healthy. I mean, it teaches us empathy, right? Empathy is the ability to put yourself into somebody else's shoes and say, "Oh, I believe you. I haven't experienced that, but I believe that that's true," which is really important. Really, really important as human beings to develop that capacity.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Christopher, for taking the time to talk to us about your research. It's been my absolute pleasure. And we'll be in touch in a couple of days to let you know what the next steps are.
All right. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
That was Christopher. Sorry, I'm just checking my little calendar schedule thing so I know what time we're coming back. That was Christopher working on the Hebrew Bible and specifically intertextuality within biblical accounts and biblical passages to try and kind of shine a spotlight on the myriad of experiences that can be gleaned from what is a very varied textual tradition rather than one book that was passed down in a finished final form to humanity. So we will be back at, 1:30 to talk to our penultimate academic scholar. So yes, we have 10 minutes. Go have a walk, get a cup of tea, and I will see you soon. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our HAPS interviews. We have 2 more people to go, and I'm sure their research will be as fascinating as everyone else's that we've spoken to today. So without further ado, hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Hiya, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly. Could you please introduce yourself and tell everyone where you're studying?
Yes, so my name's Henry Bohan, and I'm a PhD student of Egyptology in the UK, and I study through the University of Wales, Trinity St David. I'm a part-time student and also a distance learner, so I live about 3 hours away from my uni, and I work part-time as well to fund my studies.
You must be incredibly busy and very dedicated to do all of that.
Indeed, yeah.
So what is your own personal area of specialization then?
So when I kind of first went to university, I kind of became really interested. I've always been interested in Egyptology since I was very, very small, and I've always wanted to be an Egyptologist. So when I got to university and started studying it properly, I became really interested in this kind of notion of like divine kingship and the kind of God king of Egypt and how he was perceived in this very kind of magical kind of way and termed in these very kind of, like magical terminology, for instance. So the king was like a being of light, and he kind of instilled awe in his kind of subjects who kind of bowed down to him and instilled kind of fear in his enemies. This kind of stuff really like fascinated me for some reason. And you get kind of these you kind of get these instances of these particular kings who kind of go beyond this kind of normal kind of semi-divine, like godlike status that you normally do. For instance, like kings like Amenhotep III or Ramesses the Great, you see these really interesting images of them kind of worshipping themselves. So they appear in kind of temple reliefs as the kind of living mortal king, and also this kind of divine entity in which they're making offerings to themselves. So these images kind of really fascinated me. And as I was kind of researching them, I also came across other images where kings would venerate their royal ancestors, and I became really intrigued and interested in royal ancestor veneration and kind of why this was. And it wasn't really something discussed about much within kind of the scholarship. And the most kind of prominent examples of this came from what's known as the Ptolemaic period, which is a period of time sort of towards the end of kind of Egyptian civilization, around sort of 305 BC to 30 BC. It was actually a period of foreign rule where Greek kings ruled Egypt. And after the kind of conquests of Alexander the Great, he's kind of a Greek Macedonian king who conquered the Persian Empire, of which Egypt was a part of. And after he died, his empire got split up between his generals, and you have all these kind of independent kingdoms all across the Eastern Mediterranean ruled by these Greek kings. And Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals, took over Egypt, and his successors ruled Egypt for almost 300 years. They were actually kind of the longest reigning family to rule Egypt in all of its history. So when I was looking at the Ptolemies, and because I was really interested in them anyway, and I was interested in royal ancestor veneration, I came across they had like this called the Ptolemaic ruler cult, which is where you get these the living king and his wife are kind of incorporated into this cult of their royal ancestors. And this kind of just really fascinated me. And when I kind of was researching it a little bit more, I discovered that the scholarship, particularly from the early 20th century, kind of established this and said, oh, it's a Greek tradition that was brought into Egypt. And I'd kind of also been, looking at like divine kingship and these examples of Egyptian kings venerating their royal ancestors. And I thought, hang on a minute, that doesn't really make sense to me, like as an Egyptologist. So the kind of aim of my thesis, which I've kind of been doing for the past 4 years, is kind of trying to bring that narrative of the Ptolemies and the Ptolemaic ruler cult and this Greek identity, which was kind of very much established for them by early scholars, trying to look at that and bring it into the Egyptian, kind of give them back an Egyptian identity, which I think they've has been taken away from them, so to speak. So that's kind of the main part of my work. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I see when I look at divine kingship in Mesopotamia, it's not really a thing like it is in Egypt, but you see occasionally kings being portrayed as so they're usually in the middle somewhere between human and divine, and sometimes they're kind of more towards divine than the human part. Where do the Ptolemies fit on that kind of sliding scale of divinity?
So the thing that really interested me about them was the fact that the living king, and particularly the royal couple, so you get like the king and his wife, who is usually certainly from the middle Ptolemaic period to later, usually his sister as well. The living royal couple become part of this ancestral cult of their ancestors. So I kind of perceived that as like their divinity is actually attached to their royal ancestors, so to speak, which when I looked in my kind of the Egyptian evidence for that, royal ancestors appear quite frequently in kind of coronation rituals, and kind of as a collective group, kind of indifferentiated, so to speak. But then you also get instances where Egyptian kings kind of they make references to their royal ancestors. So I certainly think it's part for the Ptolemies, that's where they get their divinity from, as being kind of incorporated into this cult of their ancestors. For the Egyptian kings, kind of, and the Egyptian kingship in general, which the Ptolemies they sought to kind of be and established themselves in this kind of Egyptian culture and this Egyptian religion and historic tradition. So they kind of took on this kind of divine kingship. And it was kind of perceived as kind of like a divine office unified with a kind of a mortal body, and the two become infused at the coronation of the king. And part of my work is actually kind of, so a lot of the kind of scholarship in the past has kind of been on looking at this kind of sliding scale between divine and mortal, and where does the king fit in this? And actually kind of one of my ideas and one of the theories that I've got is that the king was actually perceived not just as kind of a divine being, but as actually also considered to be a living ancestor, and kind of holds these kind of exudes these kind of qualities of kind of cultural excellence, which is actually usually which you find in kind of culture heroes and founders who are kind of who are ancestors.
Fascinating.
And that's kind of, I think that's what they're kind of projecting and kind of incorporating themselves within this kind of cult of their own ancestors. They kind of confer this idea or kind of project this notion of this qualitative of their sort of being qualitatively ancestral as well as kind of divine, because ancestors actually are part of the divine world themselves. And in Egypt they were called the gods were called Necha, and ancestors can be part of this kind of concept of Necha too.
Very interesting. Thank you for explaining it. That's a very rich and complicated identity for the office of king.
And I mean, identity is something that's also kind of part of my thesis as well, because during this time you have during the Ptolemaic period you see a lot of Greek immigration into Egypt at the time, and the Ptolemies obviously they're foreign kings and they have to really establish their legitimacy in this country, but they have these kind of two kind of separate cultural spaces. You've got this culture of like the Greeks and the Greek immigrants on the one hand, but then you have this kind of Egyptian culture on the other, which is kind of very kind of conservative and very, you see it kind of focused in the Egyptian temples, which remain very traditional. So you have these kind of separate cultural spaces, but you also have areas where they're intermixing as well, and you get these kind of hybrid art styles which use the Egyptian and the Greek, and very beautiful and interesting objects. So the kings and the Ptolemies, I think, have to navigate all these different cultural spaces to legitimize themselves, and that manifests in very unique and interesting ways. And the ruler cult itself is quite interesting because it goes across all of those different cultural spaces.
So they had to kind of legitimize their rule both for the native Egyptian population and also for the immigrant Greek population.
Yes, totally. And in the past, they've kind of been, a lot of the earlier scholars kind of viewed them as kind of very disinterested in Egyptian culture and then like the native population, and kind of almost any Ptolemaic stuff that was Egyptian was perceived as kind of almost like lip service to it, so to speak. But part of my work, I'm trying to move away from that a little bit.
Thank you. We have a couple of comments from the audience. My Unfinished Journey has donated $20. Thank you very much. If anyone else who's watching would like to donate to HAPS, you can use the super chat function, or you can donate via the donation information scrolling across the bottom of your screen. As a reminder for those watching, everybody who donates to HAPS gets to vote for the summer research they would most like to see funded. So you both get to see where your money is going and have a direct influence in which academic gets funded. And we have a question from Alex. Would you consider the living ancestor kind of king an Egyptian feature? And did the Greek rulers in Egypt follow this pattern or break away?
So the concept of living ancestorhood isn't, I don't think it's unique to Egypt. I've read a lot of like anthropological stuff on it. And to kind of sum up the argument is to say that rulers and elites kind of project themselves as being kind of qualitatively ancestral to kind of establish their legitimacy in kind of a societal hierarchy. In Egypt, it's interesting because I kind of said this idea of like living ancestorship being part of like the Ptolemaic kingship and the Egyptian kingship too. But again, that wasn't the only, I think, perception of it. They were also kind of divine on the level of kind of the god. So the king in Egypt is the son of Ra. He's like the son of the sun god. So he can also be kind of deemed as being the representative of the sun god on earth himself. So he is kind of almost, he is like the father and the son at the same time. But because he kind of inhabits this office, which was created in primordial time, so at the beginning of like creation, he is kind of infused with this kind of spirit. Like, so in Egypt, the concepts of the soul, you have like a number of different aspects of it. You have like a bar and a car, a shadow and a name. And deities have these things as well. And when the king, when he becomes king and when he's coronated, he's kind of infused with this spirit, this ancient spirit. So that makes him kind of qualitatively older than everybody else, so to speak, because he has this kind of ancient spirit within him. For the Greek side, I'm not. I'm still kind of researching notions of whether or not that was the case, and like not with the kind of like the spirit of the god going into the king, but whether or not rulers in that time kind of established themselves kind of as kind of living ancestors. And so I hope that kind of answers the question. Certainly, I can certainly see it in Egypt, and I think it possibly is there for Greece. So I think it's a concept which wasn't necessarily alien to the Egyptians, so to speak, or the Greeks.
Thank you. What then are your summer plans, and how will HAPS funding help you with them?
So I aim to go to Egypt itself with the funding, and for a number of reasons, and I'd aim to go for about 4 to 6 weeks. Ideally, the primary reason I'd want to go is because it would help me kind of build on like my data set, basically, and the kind of data that I'm already kind of creating. I kind of have this data set where I've got like two, it's kind of a data of two halves, basically. I want to collect as much kind of information and kind of all the kind of examples of the Ptolemaic ruler cult, which we kind of see in kind of temple reliefs and in objects. That's kind of one half of it. And then the other half is kind of an identical kind of data set, but based on the kind of pre-Ptolemaic period. And then I can compare the two data sets and kind of make conclusions and see this kind of similarities and differences between the two. And this kind of data hasn't been collected before, so no one's ever really looked at the kind of these images of Egyptian kings worshipping their kind of ancestors as kind of and given it kind of an independent study and kind of separated it out from the kind of all evidence that we have. And equally, it's not been done for the Ptolemies either. So I kind of want to bring it all together, look at it and assess it. And, eventually I'd like to kind of publish it as kind of a book or a catalogue, really. And I've already found some really interesting things from it. So I think, as I said before, like the Ptolemaic ruler cult was based on these sets of kind of royal divine couples. And in ancient Egypt, in the early New Kingdom, you get like a similar example with these two royal figures, Amenhotep I and Ahmose Nefertari. They're like a mother and son duo who get venerated for a very long time, for about sort of 300 years kind of after their deaths. And even in the kind of like popular religion, they get incorporated in like religious festivals. They appear on like the coffins of private individuals. So I kind of think that the Ptolemies were kind of looking at this Egyptian history and thinking, let's copy that. People found that popular. Let's reinterpret this and put ourselves in those kind of positions. So yeah, it's already interesting data, and I hope to be able to build upon that.
That sounds really interesting.
I'd also be able to actually, so in Egypt, to the museums over there, you can't actually access the collections database remotely. You actually have to be physically present in the building, and you get shown to you get shown to a little computer suite, and you're supervised, and you can't take pictures and you can't like print off stuff, but you can make like verbatim notes on the kind of the objects information. But yeah, it's important for my data, so I'd have to. So going over there is kind of important to actually collect that information.
Well, that sounds absolutely wonderful, and I definitely hope we can help with that. I don't have any more questions for you, and I don't think the audience does either. Is there anything that you wanted to add or elaborate on before we let you go?
There was a little bit, yes.
Please.
So I'm kind of very acutely aware that my kind of topic might appear to kind of fall into kind of that kind of traditional category of like a narrative history based on rulers, so to speak, which is something that I think, you know, in the kind of like past sort of half century, like scholarship has been trying to move away from. You know, we want to find out about the lives of ordinary people through kind of archaeology and through other kind of scientific methods. What my kind of thesis, at least the theory of it in the kind of first half of my thesis, aims to do is actually kind of explain why we actually narrate history through like the narratives of these kind of esteemed individuals who represent kind of a paradigm of cultural excellence. Like, why do we actually kind of attach our identities and narrate our histories through their stories? And it's kind of a little bit of a commentary on that, so to speak, as well, which is what I think you do, or what ancient cultures did when they interacted with their ancestors. They were also interacting with their past and their notions of the past and what their kind of history meant to them. So, and I would kind of hope that the theory that I lay out would hopefully be able to use on like an interdisciplinary level as well, because we see it in like even in modern day. You have, you know, for instance, the Kim family of North Korea. They kind of instill this like veneration and worship from their subjects, on like, which includes like the living leader and his predecessors. So hopefully I'll be like adding sort of a commentary and information on like kind of why history has been told like that in the past as well. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I didn't want it to appear like it was just kind of this, you know, a narrative of certain individuals of the past, so to speak, which is, yeah, hopefully.
No, it sounds like a very interesting dimension of that particular like area of study. So I hope that people pick up on it and kind of take it further after you've put it out in the public sphere.
Me too, yes.
Well, I'm going to let you go and get on with your evening. Thank you so much for joining me and for telling us about your research.
That's no problem. Thank you for having me.
Of
and I'm
course.
very happy for you to give out my contact details if anybody has any questions that they think of later on and they were like, oh, I should have asked that. Please,
Great.
Yeah, give out my details. You are more than welcome to do that.
Thank you very much. And I will be in touch in a couple of days to let everyone know what the next steps are.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henry. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That was Henry. He's looking at the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt, specifically ancestor worship, and how the kings themselves kind of fit into this divine status of ancestor. And yes, very interesting stuff. We are going to take a brief break again. We will be back in 10 minutes for our very final HAPS interview. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our final interview of the day and our final interview for the 2022 HAP Summer Scholarships. So we have our last guest. Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi.
Could you please introduce yourself and tell us where you're studying?
Yeah, so Sorry about the last time,
Oh,
with
no,
the
that's fine.
PDT and CDT. So, yeah, my name is Sagur Mekwan, and I'm a student at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, which is in Chicago suburbs. And I am a PhD student in Hebrew Bible and exegesis track. Yeah.
Thank you very much. What is your personal area of specialization?
So, yeah, I'm trying to work with Psalter, Psalms in the Hebrew Bible. Yeah.
And what is it about the Psalms that you find interesting? Why did you choose to study them specifically?
Well, so, if you know a little bit about how the Psalms has been, studied over the last 200 years, initially everybody thought Psalms were sort of made up, or, they were written around Maccabean era. And then, so they are relatively new comparatively. And then it was Hermann Gunkel who said, no, it's not. They are like actually the traditions, oral traditions that goes way back pre-monarchic era. That's like we're looking at 10th century or 9th century BC. And then it was his student, he said that, Psalms are not just pre-monarchic era, they were actually used in the temple worship. So when Israel existed, they would have used this, the variety of Psalms during the temple worship and their liturgical collections. But one thing that intrigues me is that, for 200 years, so, Gunkel wrote in 1931, and it's all the way down now, we are 1975. Until then, everybody just studied one Psalm at a time, until there was one scholar at Yale, his name is Brevet Childs, and he pointed out that, we have collections of Psalms, like we have this Psalms 120 to 134, which says Psalms of Asams, or we have Psalms that are belonging to a guy called Korah, other group belonging to Asam. And so there's a question about, how these groups were all put together. So what's the principle of organization? And that's where I come in. And so for the last 35 years, there has been a great interest in how the Psalm has been organized. Like we could have had 3,000 Psalms, but we have only 150. And they are all consist of groups and how they are put together. That's where my research comes in. And I look at book 4, which is from Psalm 90 to 106, and how it's organized. Yeah.
Interesting, thank you. Are the groupings of the Psalms, are these a modern convention, or are these based on ancient groupings?
Yeah, so that's a very good, interesting question as well, because, everybody thought it's just put together, we have collected 150, it's an anthology. It's not so much, because when you look at Psalter, book 1, that's 1 to 41, and then book 2, 2 to 42 to 72, it's entirely consists of Psalms of David. And at the end of Psalm 72, you have this, a superscription that says, or postscript that says, these are, here the prayers of the David, son of Jesse, has ended. And it's so sort of, an indication that this is an earlier collection that was already existing. Mm-hmm. And to this earlier collections, you have book 3 added, some scholars would say. And then others would say, other Psalms were added. So Psalms, as we have now 150, it grew gradually. But all the collections are ancient collections.
Thank you. And you said you were working on book 4?
Yes. So it's from Psalm 90 to 106.
And what do you see as the guiding principle behind the collection of those particular Psalms?
So, book 3, for example, 73 to 89, it's a book of chaos, or, one of the German scholar, Beat Weber, say it's a book of downfall. So, book 1 and 2, there's a Davidic dynasty, and Israel has enjoyed this righteous king. Psalm 72, a great promise about the Solomonic king who would rule from sea to sea and from, shore to shore. But unfortunately, in book 3, you realize that, king is dead. The Davidic king is in exile. The city of Jerusalem has been ravaged. All the foreigners have invaded the city, and the city has been in chaos. And there is no hope for Davidic king. And so in Psalm 89, you hear this, sort of a cry from the people that's saying that, God, where is your love, the former love, which you promised to David? You told him that, his dynasty will be eternal, and somebody there will be always to rule in his place. But unfortunately, everything is, in chaos and destructions. And where is your former love? Where is your promise, God? So book 4 sort of comes up to console these people in exile and provides sort of a consolation and a sort of a guarantee of their future with God and, God's rule among their midst. So, for example, the first psalm in book 4, Psalm 90, is titled, a psalm of Moses, man of God. And for 1 to 89, you have Moses nowhere to be seen except in a tiny note on 77, Psalm 77, 20. Suddenly you have a psalm of Moses, and Moses prays, that God, you have been our dwelling place before the generations, from generation to generation. In other words, sort of Moses sort of, resets button and says, even before when David was not there, God you were there. And in that sense, it's a comforting book of comfort, book of consolation, and book of future assurance. I can't hear
No,
you.
I'm muted. I'm so sorry. I've been doing this all day. That was really interesting. Thank you for explaining it. What are your summer plans then, and how can HAPS help you with them?
Yes, so where HAPS comes in is like I'm working on a chapter 2 of my dissertation, and which is basically a methodology. We read one psalm, a method. So if you read a psalm as a single psalm in NTD, you can look at it as a structure, how the psalm introduced the problem or a praise and what are the reasons for praise. But when it comes to looking at how the structures are arranged together or the clusters are put together, then the question becomes, how do we study psalms? Do we study as like this 200 years, how we have been studying it? Or do we look at what are the things we need to look at so we can study Psalm 90 in relation to 89, or even in relation to the entire book 3? Or other area that I want to explore is that, book 3 has 17 Psalms, but they are not all the same. 90 and 92, there is some sort of similarity. And then from 93, you have this unequivocal, sort of a statement at the beginning says, Yahweh reigns in 93, and then in 97, 98, 99. And that sort of puts this whole 93 to 100 together. And then again, you have this David Psalm, Psalm 101 and Psalm 104, 103. And then 104, 105, 106, again, they are mosaic in character. So my question as far as how to deal with this psalm is like, how do you study these clusters together? And so what I will be doing is following some German scholars, Eric Sagur and Frank Lothar Hospel. They're both Jesuit scholars, and they have written major commentaries on discussing, the themes of redaction and understanding the whole clusters together, how to approach them, looking at the linkage, verbal linkage, also semantic linkage, like, the similar words, and also looking up themes and metaphors, which are not, at a first reading or a plain reading, they might not be clear to someone. But if you dig deeper, then you kind of realize that, although these 3 Psalms seems different, addressing different situations, they have some sort of underlying unity and a theme that they are addressing. So that would be my summer research, working with, the works of Robert Childs, Christopher Sides, Eric Sagur, Frank Lothar Hospel, and Beat Weber, and a French scholar whose name I seems to be forgetting right now. But yeah, that's the sort of my work right now. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a audience question. Do other ancient Near Eastern cultures impact your research on the Psalms, or do you just remain within biblical and Jewish literature?
Yeah, so I would be interested mainly with the Hebrew Bible because my topic is canonical in nature, and my doctoral area of specialization is Hebrew Bible and exegesis. So I'm primarily a language student. I will definitely look up the work of Othmar Gill, who has done quite a bit of work on iconography, how the various iconographics images were used in the ancient world, and the similar images were employed in the Israelite world, and how these images come up in the Psalms, and how they provide insights related to the similarities between ancient cultures and the the Israelite culture. However, as far as my topic is concerned, I am really doing a linguistic work. So there's not much, I'm not aware if any ancient, cultures, as far as Mesopotamia or Egypt, had any, like a sort of canonical literature, just as Psalms we have in the Bible. And if they had, and if it was arranged in such a fashion, I'm not aware of so far. Yeah.
I see. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. When you have finished your PhD and graduated, what plans do you have for your research?
Well, my plans currently, I'm adjuncting at my university, and I'm also a pastor at a Presbyterian church. I'm Presbyterian, and I want to continue to do so. So probably my eventual plan is half-time. Like, I'm planning to teach at a school in India, theological school, and partly teach in USA here. So it will be like between the continents. I'm married to Korean, so my family is sort of a cross-cultural in a sense, and my kids are, residents of India, Korea, and America. So we've been traveling around. So I suppose that would be my life, but mainly the focus is teaching the Hebrew Bible.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing. I don't have any more questions, and I don't believe the audience has any more. Do you have any thoughts or final elaborations that you'd like to share before we let you go on with your day?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, this is an exciting topic. Everybody would say that about their topic, but, I want to encourage people to read the Psalms together, not just one at a time. So that's a sort of my end goal, not just to produce, a scholarly work that actually provide justification for what it is, but also, provide a heuristic model that actually encourages everyone to look at Psalms like Psalm 1 and 2 as an entryway, Psalm 146 to 50 as a sort of crescendo of praise, as all things leads to, God's kingship and his rule. And in between, you have this sort of a chaos or tension between the presence of the Davidic king, absence of the Davidic king, and the coming of God's kingdom. I think if we keep these things in mind, then, our reading of the Hebrew Bible will be much richer. And as for the Christian audience, it will be even more richer to, read the New Testament and connect it to coming of Christ. So that would be my 2 cents of, additions to my work. Yeah.
Thank you. As something that I always say when we're looking at the Hebrew Bible in its wider cultural context of the ancient Near East is that if you read it in conjunction with the other associated literature from the other cultures, it becomes a much richer text. And I feel like you're saying the exact same thing with the Psalms. If you read them as groups and in conjunction with one another, then you actually get an awful lot more from them than keeping them separate.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for talking to us about your research. I really appreciate you taking the time to share it with us. It sounds very interesting. And I'll be in touch in a few days to let everybody know what happens next.
All right. Thank you so much. And once again, thanks for accommodating me, with the
absolutely.
last time. So
thank you.
All right. Okay. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Okay. That is everybody. Thank you to our audience for sticking with us. It's been a whole month of interviews and I have enjoyed all of them. I always say this and I mean it sincerely. I greatly enjoy listening to all of our students talk about their research and share their enthusiasm with us, and really take the time to explain what it is they're researching to people who are interested but are not other PhD students, which doesn't seem like it would be difficult, but it is actually a real challenge because you spend all of your academic career talking to other academics and you kind of forget how to explain it to people who aren't academics. And I think everyone that we've spoken to this month have done a truly fantastic job. I've greatly enjoyed myself and judging by the interactions we've had with the audience, you've all enjoyed yourselves too. Again, if you would like to have a say in where the money goes, you can donate to HAPS. There is donation information running along the bottom of your screen. Every single donor, no matter how big or how small a donation, gets to vote for the research they would most like to see funded. We will be funding definitely 3 students, possibly 4. I need to look at the bank account and see how much we currently have available. But 3 students definitely will get $2,000 each to help fund their summer research. So if you're kind of watching the tail end of this and you're like, what is this? What's going on? Check out the website. There is a whole playlist as well on YouTube of all of our interviews this year. So please definitely donate, and everyone who donates will get an email from me with details about how to vote, and that will be happening this week. So if you have donated, if you're a HAPS donor, please keep an eye on your email account. And if you don't get an email and you think you should, send me a line, digitalhammurabi@gmail.com, and I will get you all the relevant information. And with that, we are done. Thank you, everybody, for your time, for your attention, for your donations. It's been a pleasure and a privilege, and we will be back probably next week to announce the official HAPS 2022 winners. So have a lovely evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and I will see you soon.